I've got bad news for you, Switch. Let me Switch people that are from the Nintendo Switch. This is just really bad news, and it's so much worse because between the lines of everything that is said in this article, this is concerning stuff. And to go over what I mean, like, I read tech articles all the time, but it's produced an intelligence that is able to read an article and interpret beyond the lines of what is said in the tech manuals and everything. Over time I've gotten better at that than I have everywhere else. And so, it's no secret. So I'm going to read the article to you, and then I'm going to explain some stuff to you that wasn't mentioned in the article so that you'll understand this. And this is going to take some time, and I hope you have it. It's no secret that Nintendo is among the most draconian actors when it comes to intellectual property. Tech Dirt is rife with posts on the various ways the company has been a royal, an overreaching pain in the ass on everything, on anything from with even the most modest concern over copyrights, trademarks, or patents. From attempting to unmask anonymous denizens over leaks to, yeah, which is absolutely insane, to failed lawsuits against Nintendo's South American grocers over nonsense trademark concerns. By the way, if I had a job at the company, doxing anonymous denizens would be a talent I might be able to help them with, but see, I have OSI and T skills, but failed lawsuits against South American grocers over nonsense trademark concerns, to finding literally any reason to sue a competitor over patents that never should have been granted just because it can. The company simply never misses an opportunity to treat its own industry and fans poorly at the hands of its lawyers. And I only said that before, said that I have IT skills because, I would love to work for them as a company because they treat their employees well. It's their fans they treat like shit, but their employees are well paid and treated well. This is including threats to brick customers' consoles if they agree to new EULAs after the console had been purchased, which, this is alarming. This article in particular is the one that really had me concerned. If they fail to agree to new EULAs after like that, this last one is particularly notable as one issue. Nintendo was once again issuing a similar threat, but this time the new outlines all the things, including legal things, that might cause Nintendo to turn your Switch 2 into a paperweight. First spotted by GameFile, readers may encounter a paywall. Nintendo has repeatedly changed its online user agreement to multiple customer unfriendly ways just before the launch of the Switch 2. Chief among them, Nintendo asserts the right to render your console permanently unusable if it determines you're in violation of the agreement. Nintendo's specific new phrasing, distinct from the U era from 2021, is that you acknowledge that if you fail to comply with the foregoing conclusions, Nintendo may render the Nintendo account services and or applicable Nintendo device, emphasis mine, permanently unusable in whole or in part. So what might so offend the company that it would remotely disable the device that you bought? Some of it is what you'd expect. Don't circumvent its anti-piracy protections. Don't pirate its games. These still aren't kosher. More on this, but there's this: publish, copy, modify, reverse engineer, rent, decompile, disassemble, distribute or offer for sale, or create derivative works of any portion of the Nintendo account services. The old UDA had some of this language, but it was inclusive of language that such acts had to violate local laws to be forbidden. The new UDA includes no such language, which, as PC Gamer rightly points out, is a pretty big problem. The section I most take issue with are the prohibitions on copying, modifying, or decompiling software, particularly as it no longer accounts for being explicitly permissible by applicable law, as well as hardware software modifications that would cause the Nintendo account services to operate other than in accordance with its documented and intended use. No game or hardware modding, no extracting ROMs, something Nintendo continuously asserts we cannot do, even though it's a legally protected consumer right, and no booting to another OS. Nintendo was once again asserting rights it doesn't appear to have, at least in America. In what world can someone sell me a fuck it thing and then make sure it's unusable because it doesn't like an action I took with it? Do we fucking own the thing or do we not? Worse yet, the Yulia makes it clear that Nintendo is the judge, jury, and executioner on these matters. There's nothing in the language that bricking your device indicates Nintendo is going to go to any legal authority or third party before doing so. If it suspects you're engaging in forbidden by Nintendo only activity, the company can break your shit. So what happens when they're wrong? There's also the very legitimate concern of a notoriously heavy-handed litigious company acting on false positives. I don't know what means Nintendo has to detect such which I don't know what means Nintendo has to detect such activity and kill a console, but I'm getting a clear message. You spent $450 on this hardware, but Nintendo does not think you own it. There hasn't been a bigger uproar over these changes that there hasn't been a bigger uproar over these changes is plainly absurd. They're so anti-consumer as to be ridiculous, and all this is legally begging for introduction from the federal government, assuming the Trump administration hasn't hollowed out the government's ability to protect its own people from this sort of thing. But anyone buying a Switch 2 when it's released is at risk of having an expensive paperweight. Otherwise, you've been warned. And I saw this, okay, and, I told you that I would buy it on April 3rd. I wasn't able to carry out that, thing because it had been basically, as everybody laughed at me, it had not ultimately been, you know, uh, yeah, I had to pay 700 for, or 670 for mine rather than 450 for my Nintendo Switch 2 because, the supply, issues had been, a thing and, like that was a problem, but here is what what was not mentioned by Timothy Geithner at Tector, which is what makes this video high value in of itself tech commentary and not simply a normal video regarding technology or it lists some things that Timothy Geithner didn't go over in his article and allows me to point out some stuff that was not mentioned here. The fact that what this means, that Nintendo, we don't know how it is that they're doing this. We don't know. But in effect, what this means is that they're asserting the right, at least. We don't know that they actually have, but it's asserting the right to do so that they have the means, or that they will construct the means if they don't already to brick your shit in the if they feel that you're doing anything forbidden. And this wouldn't be terribly concerning for somebody like me because I'd just be like, lol, I know about DNS and I can engineer in firewall rules to permanently block Nintendo's servers and make sure that it can't phone home because it's put in a DNS sinkhole, so Nintendo doesn't get any incoming data. It's completely stealthed, and if they try to phone into it to probe it, it will also just null route into nothing and everything. But I thought about that and I paused over it and I thought, you know, hey guys, do you remember Back Orifice back in the day? Now, for those of you who are uninitiated into hacking, Back Orifice, often shortened to BO, is a computer program designed for remote system administration. It enables users to control a computer running the Microsoft Windows operating system from a remote location. The name is a play on words on Microsoft's back office server software. It can control multiple computers at the same time using imaging. Back Orifice has a client server architecture. A small unintrusive server is on one machine, which is remotely manipulated by a client program with a graphical user interface on another computer. Two components of communication with one another using TCP or the UDP network protocol. In reference to LEAP phenomenon, this program commonly runs on port 131337. The program debuted at DEF CON 6 on August 1st, 1998. It was the brainchild of Sir Disick, a member of the U.S. hacker organization Cult of the Dead Cow. According to this group, this purpose was to demonstrate the lack of security in Microsoft's Windows 9X series of operating systems. Although Back Orifice has legitimate purposes, such as remote administrations. Other factors make it suitable for illicit uses. The server can hide from cursory looks by users of the system. Since the server can be installed without user interaction, it can be also distributed as a payload form of Trojan horse. For those and other reasons, the antivirus industry immediately categorized the tool as malware and appended Back Orifice to their quarantine list. Despite this fact, it was widely used by script kiddies because of its simple GUI. It's because of its simple GUI and ease of installation. The two sequel applications followed it: Back Orifice 2000, released in 1999, and Deep Back Orifice by French-Canadian hacking group QHA. Now, why would I mention all of this? Why would I bring all of this up? And how is this an act of reading between the lines? Well, to break it down for you, you know, so here he says, I don't know what means Nintendo has to detect such activity and kill a console. Now, the problem with this is that you don't need to necessarily just worry about Nintendo as a company, as was demonstrated back in the day by the existence of this particular program, Back Orifice, which highlighted the security vulnerabilities that existed in Microsoft Windows and was released by a third party company, a third party group that had literally nothing at all to do with Microsoft. We're completely isolated and unassociated with Microsoft in any way, and just did it to demonstrate that Microsoft's operating system and security by obscurity approach had ultimately failed. And why this is so concerning is that Nintendo is going to have to, in order to enforce this, engineer in tools to make the console phone home if there's funky behavior, for one thing, which can be DNS sinkholed. But also they're going to have the tools to respond to this by remotely connecting to the Switch that's phoning home from elsewhere and sending a signal to it that effectively causes it to brick. Why is this concerning? Because the implication of all that I've mentioned means that Nintendo is not the only threat actor that you need to worry about. Anybody that takes the trouble, to go through the effort of learning how to reverse engineer how the means that Nintendo is using to do this, and over time, those means will become very, very clear to hackers everywhere. Effectively, it means that that signal and communications will eventually get sniffed, and the protocol that Nintendo uses to do it will be reverse engineered, and that in effect means that every hacker in the world, if they know the IP of your Nintendo Switch, will be able to send a signal to it, whether or not you're breaking the law or not, whether or not you've violated Nintendo's EULA or not. It means that you need to worry about every hacker in the world. Just so you know. Malicious, bad act. Nintendo is now banking on the idea that security by obscurity, which has failed nearly every company on the planet who's ever used it as a strategy, will not be reverse engineered in hacks. And I am coming forward here on my channel to tell you that I would literally bet money that it will be reverse engineered and it will be abused by threat actors other than Nintendo. It introduces a malware vector, a ransomware vector potentially to your Switch. It introduces a security vulnerability. The problem with Nintendo building in a security vulnerability is they're banking on the idea that they're the only ones that will ever figure out how to use their in-house tools, which is a fucking, like, the conceited arrogance of it is astonishing. like, this is a miscalculation of truly stunning proportions by the company. Like, you need to be concerned, very, very much so. Now, do I believe that open source, as a security model is perfect? No. But having more eyeballs on, these systems always, helps engineer out, security holes. And so the track record of open source software from a security perspective has ultimately been, a tiny, or at least better than Windows has been historically, and has had a better track record than security by obscurity has in a broad diversity of products over the long run. That doesn't mean security has never failed. For instance, on Linux, and Linux systems have never been hacked. I mean, they have, despite their open source, software. But these kinds of events are relatively rare, especially since they're considered by hackers and script kiddies and everything to be, not, they're not considered to be as, the low hanging fruit problem. You know, most script kiddies are more than happy to target Windows based systems, but when it comes to, these Linux systems that will actually require skill to hack, at that point, most people who have the skills are going to ultimately just be gainfully employed in the industry, and will, basically probably look at it as this criminal hacking doesn't really have, the kind, it's not as lucrative as ultimately, simply, doing security auditing, for an actual legitimate company. Or probably be paid better, to stay above ground than lower, than to break the law and to be a black hat, and there's less, for a hacker, there's more incentive to be a white hat than there really is to be a black, ultimately. And but the problem here is that, the black hat hackers are almost certainly going to basically reverse engineer how Nintendo, what the means Nintendo is using to do this. And people will find ways to do it. Nintendo might try to come forward and say, we will make the system only do this if, like, certain IPs are in the background, or but if they do that, yet again, I mean, effectively, this isn't a particularly difficult adversary to beat. For one thing, if a hacker ever burrows into their networks, they can build a proxy into it, and then it resolves to the proper IP address, and it will go through anyways. And on top of that, if it's all coming from a single IP address, that means you can build in firewall rules to block all incoming traffic from, that IP address, so the brick signal never goes through. It just routes to a, error, and never actually goes through. So it doesn't really ultimately matter. You can block these communications. You can take control of your network in such a way that, those, will never get through. So, I don't know what security that they're going to engineer into this as well, but I wouldn't. I'm worried now. I'm genuinely concerned because, with the ability to actually think beyond what is reported in these tech articles, with the ability to have a wider perspective than is often put forward in the publication, of a lot of them, especially as a 2600 reader, like, the one thing I'm thinking to myself is, oh God, what happens when somebody who isn't associated with Nintendo reverse engineers the means they use to do this, and then takes advantage of them, Then you can effectively go on a rampage and brick people's systems all over the place just because you didn't like them or something they said to you.